And the origin of new body plans, the origin of higher forms of life would require novel information. And it looks like, as you were saying, we're losing
We are
this
losing
information.
information. The fact of the matter is that evolutionists believe in what is called macroevolution, big changes over time, so that a cat could evolve into a dog or a horse or whatever. Um, Now, what do we see in nature? We see microevolution. We see little tiny changes over time. Now, there's over 7 billion people alive on Earth today. No two are exactly alike genetically. Even identical twins are not identical. They may appear identical, and you look at it from 6 feet away, and you can't tell the difference, at least until they open their mouth. But the fact of the matter is, they don't have the same retina scans. They don't have the same fingerprints. And when they open their mouth, you find out that there are distinctly different people. One's interested in sports, another interested in science. One is interested in art, the other in athletics. They are not the same on the inside, and technically they're not the same on the outside either. Now, that is microevolution. Changes within a kind, but never produce the changes necessary to make it a different kind. As a matter of fact, the laws of genetics prevent this. The laws of genetics give us the gene pool, as it's called, of course. But if you think about it, a pool has an edge, correct? Keeps the water inside.
Right, exactly.
Well, genetics prevents information from being added by random chance, again, preventing an increase in complexity or intelligence by random chance. And therefore, we can get to the edge of the envelope. Now, I'm Scottish by background, the name McMurtry. We're very proud of Clydesdale horses, right? Well, it's one of the, not the biggest, but one of the biggest horses in the world. Now, while we are very proud of Clydesdales, if you take the biggest male, the biggest female Clydesdale, you will eventually reach a point at which you will not get a bigger horse. And the illustration I always like to give is that of dogs, because I think people are really able to think about dogs and different species of dogs, or the hybrids that we have, manufactured really ourselves by guiding the breeding process. So again, let's take poodle. I like to pick on poodles. There's the center-sized poodle, which is a pretty good-sized dog, and of course, it's a breed that's been around for over 2,000 years. Originally, a waterfowl dog bred by the Egyptians, but there is such a thing as a giant poodle, and that's a big poodle. And then, of course, what people like to do with poodles is they like to make them smaller and smaller over time. Would you agree? And so what happens, and I don't remember because I'm not a dog breeder, but you have the giant, the standard, and then you go down to miniature, and eventually you end up with teacup, right?
Yes.
Now think with me, if I could continue that process genetically, eventually I would end up with an invisible dog. You see, there's limits to the genetic changes that can occur within a gene pool. You can get bigger to the edge of the envelope, but you can't get bigger. You can get smaller till you reach the edge of the envelope, but you can't get any smaller. For instance, in the case of the poodle, if you were to be able to get a female that got smaller, eventually she would get so small that during her pregnancy, the pups inside her, while growing, the embryos would literally rip her apart and they would all die.
Right. Good. Right. Good point. Good. It's kind of like if I were to work out for a year straight and I'm able to, lift 200 pounds. Well, you can't extrapolate that to mean in 10 years I'm going to be able to lift 1,000 pounds. There's clearly some limits built in there. Just like you said, there's limits built into the gene pool.
Well, again, I think that's a really great point we need to elaborate on. For instance, evolutionists like to tell you that everything occurs at a constant rate.
Yes.
So, for instance, the separation of the continents, which I say took 1 year, and I say that for good scientific reasons as well as biblical ones. But they say that, oh, well, they broke apart 200 million supposed years ago. They've been moving at 2-3 inches per year for every year for 200 million years, and that's why we have thousands of miles across the Atlantic today. Now, I agree the continents used to fit together, and I agree they moved apart, and I say it was only in 1 year. However, think with me for a second. They want to extrapolate a rate of 2 or 3 inches per year over 200 million years. Now, is that even credible? The answer, of course, is no, it's not. Let me give you an example. I don't know whether you have children or not, but just for a moment, anyway, let's say that you have a daughter and she's 4 years old today. Now, she's been growing in height pretty quick, right? She went from a baby to being 4 years old, and she's a certain number of inches high. And I were to ask you, well, how many inches higher did she get in her height from her 3rd birthday to her 4th birthday? And let us say that you tell me, well, I think she's grown 3 inches tall in the last year, taller. I would then ask you this question, well, how tall will she be when she's 30?
Right, yeah.
So let's see. Well, if she was growing at 3 inches per year the last year, and if we believed by faith in our religion that's 3 inches every year, let's see, she'd be over 90 inches tall on her 30th birthday, correct?
Right, yeah. If you go according to uniformitarian processes, of course.
But the evolutionists believe in uniformitarianism, that things have acted uniformly throughout eternal time, that mass, energy, and time, and the laws that are currently in existence have acted uniformly over these millions and billions of supposed years. And yet, when you look at it, it's an absurd concept because in nature, rates change over time.
No, exactly right. And something you said there really struck me as interesting, because you talked about how the continents are drifting away. So if you take that back in time, according to uniformitarian processes, you go back, millions of years ago to, say, a supercontinent. But you were talking about how, could you elaborate on that? Like, do we look to continental sprint and catastrophic plate tectonics, or what's the science behind that, Dr. Grady?
Well, first of all, uniformitarians, evolutionists, say the continents all used to fit together and broke apart. Again, an event that supposedly occurred, let us just say approximately 200 million years ago, according to them. Yeah. And they measure the distance that is across the Atlantic today from Africa to South America. And they divide it by 200 million years, and they say, oh, well, it's been moving at 2 inches a year for 200 million years. The fact of the matter is, of course, first of all, rates in nature are not uniform in that way. Now, we do have the physical evidence, and in my presentation called The Waters Cleaved, we have a DVD on this. We show exactly what happened. We show the physical evidence to prove it. And indeed, first of all, if you want to see whether the continents fit together, you don't want to take a look at where sea level is today. You want to take a look at the edge of the continents. And the edge of the continents are at the continental shelf, currently covered by water today. And so while the continents may appear to fit together relatively well at sea level today, when you take away the water, which is what I do, I show a world without water, they fit together almost perfectly. And you can see the evidence of where the water is knifed through from below. When it says in the Hebrew, the waters cleaved, that's Genesis, what I call the convenience store verse of the Bible, Genesis 7:11. And in Hebrew, it does not say that the fountains of the great deep or the springs of waters burst forth or broke open. What it really says is the waters cleaved in Hebrew. Now, the word to cleave means to come to a knife edge. Isn't there a big meat knife called a meat cleaver? And so to cleave means to come to a knife edge. And so what it really says conceptually in the Hebrew is that the water's knifed through from below. Now, if you remove the water from the world, you will actually see where the water is knifed through from below. And what is a remarkable thing is that you will notice that the crack begins at Caesarea Philippi in northern Israel, goes right straight down the Jordan River to the Red Sea, goes right straight down the Red Sea, out the Gulf of Aden, into the Indian Ocean, and around the world. Now, to call that coincidence would be stretching credulity. So, you can see that physical evidence. Also, now today, hot rock is still coming up in the middle of the Atlantic along the mid-Atlantic ridge, producing things like black smokers and volcanic eruptions and so forth underwater. And again, you can clearly see this. Now, evolutionists look at this and they say, well, this is evidence of the continents moving slowly apart. Well, first of all, today, even on Google Earth, which has become far better than it used to be, you can actually see that on the bottom of the Atlantic, as well as in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, there are stretch marks. Now, stretch marks only happen fast. They don't happen slow and gradually. Secondly, when you deal with volcanic materials and you try to age the rock, what evolutionists would tell you that you would use the potassium-argon method. And potassium-argon method tests have been done across the mid-Atlantic ridge. What's interesting is if evolution was true, then the youngest rock should be in the middle and the oldest rock be near the continents. Is that correct? But when we take the potassium-argon dates, we find exactly the opposite, which would refute evolutionary time. Again, another piece of physical evidence that is irrefutable is that at the mouth of the Mississippi River, there's only 4,500 years worth of mud accumulated. That's the same that's at the mouth of the Amazon, the Congo, the Indus, the Ganges. We show this. Now, if the continents had broken apart some 200 million, suppose, years ago, if the continents were only moving 2-3 inches per year, every year rain would have fallen on the continents, washing mud into the Atlantic from both sides. And if they are moving apart at only 2 to 3 inches per year, we would expect to find a thick layer of mud going from one continent to the other. But sometimes the proof that creation is true and evolution is false is not the evidence that's there, it's the evidence that's not there. And there is no thick layer of mud. The mid-oceanic ridge is clearly visible. There are places on the ocean floor where there is no mud at all. Now, you would think if the Earth were millions and millions of years old, ocean currents would have stirred mud over the entire bottom of the oceans. Not true. And therefore, we can see that there's only been 4,500 years worth of erosion on the continents. This tells us that there was a worldwide flood about 4,500 years ago, that the continents have only been eroding for about the last 4,500 years. Where we look, we have the physical evidence to prove that this all happened fast. Stretch marks happen fast. I said it all was in 1 year. The Bible says it was all in 1 year.